It all started with a dream. A man, born into poverty and raised by a single mother, had worked his entire life to rise above the struggles that once defined him. He didn't have much growing up: hand-me-down clothes, second-hand shoes, and meals that were more about filling stomachs than satisfying taste buds. But what he lacked in material things, he made up for with grit, determination, and an unshakable belief in himself. Over the years, he built something remarkable: a business empire. From real estate to tech startups, he owned it all. And now, at 39 years old, he was ready for his next big move: a car dealership. The dealership wasn't just any random purchase. It was a chance to breathe new life into a struggling business. The previous owner had retired, leaving behind a place that needed fresh energy, modern ideas, and a leader who could inspire change. For him, this wasn't just about making money. It was about creating opportunities for others, building something meaningful, and proving that success isn't just for those born with silver spoons. But there was one thing he always did before stepping into a new venture. He went undercover. He believed the best way to understand a business was to see it from the ground up, through the eyes of the people who kept it running day in and day out. So instead of walking in as the new owner, he decided to start as someone nobody would notice: a janitor. Early Monday morning, he arrived at the dealership dressed in worn-out clothes, carrying a mop bucket and a broom. His name tag read Martin, a simple alias to blend in. No one knew who he really was, not even the manager, who prided himself on being the boss everyone feared. As Martin walked through the glass doors of the showroom, he took a deep breath. This was going to be interesting. The dealership was everything you'd expect: an expansive space filled with shiny luxury cars, polished floors, and sleek furniture. It screamed wealth and sophistication, but beneath the surface, something felt off. The employees moved around like robots, avoiding eye contact with each other. There was tension in the air, a vibe that said this wasn't a happy workplace. That's when he saw him, the manager. Tall, sharply dressed, and oozing arrogance, the man strutted across the showroom floor like he owned the place. In reality, he was just the guy in charge, but he carried himself like royalty. When he spotted Martin mopping near a brand new sports car, his expression changed instantly. "Hey you," the manager barked, pointing at Martin. "What do you think you're doing? Don't touch those cars unless I tell you to. You're here to clean, not gawk." Martin nodded politely, keeping his cool. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice calm and respectful. But the manager wasn't done. He stepped closer, looking down at Martin with a sneer. "You know, we don't need just anyone working here," the manager continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "People like you should be grateful to even have a job like this. Don't screw it up." Martin didn't say a word. Instead, he lowered his gaze and went back to mopping, letting the manager's words wash over him. He'd heard worse in his life, but he couldn't help but notice how the man spoke, not just to him, but to everyone around. Employees scurried away when the manager approached, their faces etched with anxiety. Customers seemed uneasy too, glancing nervously as the manager hovered over sales conversations, interrupting whenever he felt like it. As the day wore on, Martin observed more. The manager barked orders at the receptionist, criticized a salesperson for not meeting targets, and even complained loudly about how lazy the staff was. It was clear that fear was the foundation of his leadership style. People followed his instructions, not because they respected him, but because they were afraid of what might happen if they didn't. Despite the tension, Martin stayed focused. He cleaned quietly, listening carefully to every conversation, watching every interaction. He learned quickly that the manager ruled with an iron fist, demanding perfection while offering little support or encouragement. It was no wonder morale seemed so low. By lunchtime, Martin had already formed a picture of the dealership's culture, or lack thereof. It was a place where people came to work, not to thrive, where dreams were crushed under the weight of constant criticism. And yet, amidst all the negativity, Martin noticed small moments of hope. The receptionist smiled warmly at customers despite her stressful morning. A mechanic cracked jokes with his coworkers during a quick break. Even the janitorial staff shared stories and laughter in the corner of the garage. These tiny glimpses of humanity reminded Martin why he was here. He wasn't just buying a business, he was stepping into a community, a group of people who, despite their challenges, still showed up every day, hoping for something better. And he intended to give them exactly that. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the showroom floor, Martin leaned against his mop handle and thought about the week ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be tough moments, uncomfortable confrontations, and hard truths to face. But he also knew one thing for certain. Change was coming. And when it did, it would shake this dealership to its core. For now, though he was just Martin the janitor, and he had a lot more cleaning to do, the manager's behavior didn't improve as the day went on. In fact, it got worse. By mid-afternoon, he was pacing the showroom floor like a storm cloud, his sharp eyes scanning for anything, or anyone, he could criticize. It wasn't long before his gaze landed on the janitor again. Martin was mopping near the entrance, trying to stay out of the way while keeping the floors spotless. The dealership prided itself on its polished appearance, and Martin knew that even the smallest speck of dirt could set off the manager. But no matter how careful he was, it seemed the man found fault in everything he did. "Hey you," the manager snapped, striding over with an exaggerated wave of his hand. "What is this? Are you even trying? Look at these streaks." Martin stopped mopping and glanced down at the floor. To him, it looked clean, shiny even. But the manager wasn't satisfied. He bent down dramatically, running his finger along the tile as if expecting to find dust. When he stood back up, he held up his fingertip triumphantly. "See this?" he said, practically shouting now. "This is unacceptable. Do I need to show you how to mop properly?" Martin nodded calmly, avoiding eye contact. "Sorry, sir. I'll fix it right away." But the manager wasn't done. Instead of walking away, he grabbed the mop from Martin's hands and began demonstrating what he thought was the right way to clean. He pushed the mop across the floor aggressively, splashing water onto nearby displays. A few drops landed on a sleek black car parked nearby, leaving faint marks on its glossy surface. "Oh, great," muttered one of the salespeople under their breath, watching nervously from behind her desk. She quickly grabbed a cloth and started wiping the car down, hoping the manager wouldn't notice. But of course he did. "What are you doing?" he demanded, turning his attention to her. "Why weren't you paying attention to this mess? This is your responsibility too, you know." The woman froze, her face flushing red. I'm sorry, sir, I'll take care of it." The manager huffed and turned back to Martin, who was standing quietly beside him, waiting for the lecture to end. "And you," he said, pointing the mop handle directly at Martin's chest. "You're supposed to be the professional here. If you can't handle something as simple as mopping, maybe this isn't the job for you." Martin didn't respond. He simply took the mop back when the manager shoved it into his hands and resumed cleaning. Inside, though, he felt a mix of emotions, frustration, pity, and a growing determination to understand why this man acted the way he did. Was it insecurity, arrogance, or just years of unchecked power? Later that afternoon, things escalated during a staff meeting. The manager called everyone together in the break room, where rows of folding chairs faced a whiteboard covered in sales targets and motivational quotes. As the employees filed in, they avoided looking at each other, their body language tense. They knew what was coming, a barrage of criticism disguised as feedback. When everyone was seated, the manager cleared his throat loudly and began speaking. "All right, listen up," he said, pacing in front of the group. "We've got some serious issues around here. Sales are down, customer complaints are up, and frankly, I'm tired of having to babysit all of you." His gaze swept over the room, lingering on each person as if daring them to speak. No one did. "And then there's this." He gestured toward Martin, who had been asked to sit in the corner since he technically worked at the dealership too. "Our new janitor. Let's give him a round of applause, shall we?" The room fell silent. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of what was about to happen. Then, slowly, a few hesitant claps broke out. Others followed, until the entire room was filled with awkward applause. "Isn't he amazing?" the manager continued. his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The hardest working janitor we've ever had. Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without someone like him." Laughter rippled through the room, but it wasn't genuine. It was forced, nervous laughter. Martin kept his expression neutral, pretending not to hear the mocking tone. He'd dealt with worse in his life, and he knew this moment would pass. Still, not everyone joined in. One young receptionist sat quietly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glanced at Martin briefly, sympathy flickering in her eyes. Another employee, a mechanic who rarely interacted with the office staff, shot the manager a disapproving look before staring at the floor. After the meeting ended, Martin returned to his work, determined to focus on the task at hand. But as he cleaned the windows near the sales desks, he couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation between the staff. Some were venting about the manager's attitude, while others whispered about missed promotions or unfair treatment. It was clear that resentment ran deep within the team. One particularly heated discussion caught Martin's attention. Two salespeople were arguing in hushed tones about a recent deal that had fallen through. Apparently, the manager had pressured a customer into buying unnecessary add-ons only to lose the sale entirely when the buyer walked out. "He doesn't care about us or the customers," one of them said bitterly. "All he cares about is making himself look good." Martin nodded to himself, filing the information away. Every interaction, every complaint, it all painted a picture of a workplace on the brink of collapse. And yet, despite the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. The receptionist who refused to laugh at his expense. The mechanic who defended him silently. Even the salespeople who complained about the manager showed signs of wanting change. As the evening approached, Martin decided to test the waters further. While cleaning near the finance department, he struck up a casual conversation with one of the employees. "How's business been lately?" he asked lightly, pretending to be curious. The employee sighed heavily. "Not great, honestly. Things have been rough for a while now. People come in interested, but they leave frustrated. We try our best, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Martin nodded sympathetically. "Sounds tough. Any idea what's causing it?" The employee hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's him," he said finally, nodding toward the manager's office. "He runs this place like it's his kingdom. Everyone's afraid of him, so nobody speaks up. Customers can tell something's wrong and it drives them away." Martin thanked the man for sharing and went back to work, his mind racing. The pieces were starting to come together. The manager's toxic leadership style wasn't just affecting morale, it was hurting the business. Employees were demotivated, customers were dissatisfied, and the dealership's reputation was suffering as a result. That night, after the dealership closed, Martin stayed behind to finish cleaning. As he worked, he thought about everything he'd seen and heard. The manager's cruelty masked deeper insecurities, and the staff's frustration stemmed from years of neglect and mistreatment. But there was potential here, real, untapped potential. With the right leadership, this place could thrive. For now, though, Martin remained focused on his role as the janitor. He still had 4 more days to gather information, observe interactions, and prepare for the changes he planned to make. Little did the manager know the man he mocked and belittled was about to turn his world upside down. As Martin locked up and headed home, he allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps a few surprises. By Wednesday morning, the tension in the dealership had reached a boiling point. The manager's behavior hadn't improved. If anything, it had gotten worse. He strutted around like he owned the place, barking orders at anyone within earshot, and finding fault in every little thing. Employees tiptoed around him, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. Customers picked up on the unease too. Some left without buying anything, while others complained about feeling rushed or pressured. Martin, still undercover as the janitor, continued to observe everything quietly. He cleaned floors, wiped windows, and emptied trash bins, all while keeping his ears open for conversations that might reveal more about the inner workings of the dealership. What he heard wasn't surprising. It was heartbreaking. During a lull in the morning rush, Martin overheard two salespeople talking near the coffee machine. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes, leaned against the counter and sighed deeply. "I can't keep doing this," she said softly, shaking her head. "Every day is the same. Him yelling at us, customers walking out angry, and then we're blamed for everything." The other salesperson, an older man with gray streaks in his hair, nodded knowingly. "It's not just you," he replied. "Everyone feels the same way. But what choice do we have? If we quit, we'll never find another job like this. And if we stay, we suffer. Either way, we lose." Martin paused nearby, pretending to scrub a stain on the floor. His heart ached for these people. They weren't lazy or incompetent. They were trapped in a toxic environment, forced to endure abuse because they needed the paycheck. He wanted to tell them that things would get better, but he couldn't reveal his true identity yet. Instead, he listened silently, letting their words sink in. Later that afternoon, Martin witnessed something that made his blood boil. A customer, a middle-aged man wearing a suit, was browsing through the luxury cars when the manager approached him. At first, the interaction seemed normal enough. The manager greeted the customer warmly, shaking his hand and asking how he could help. But it didn't take long for the conversation to turn sour. "I'm interested in this model," the customer said, pointing to a sleek sedan. "Can you walk me through the financing options?" The manager launched into a lengthy explanation, but instead of answering the customer's question, he started pushing expensive add-ons, extended warranties, custom paint jobs, upgraded sound systems. The customer frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Appreciate the suggestions," he said politely, "but I'm really just looking for basic financing terms right now." The manager didn't back down. "Trust me, sir, these extras will save you money in the long run. You don't want to regret not having them later." The customer crossed his arms, growing visibly frustrated. "That's not what I asked for," he said firmly. "I came here to buy a car, not to be sold unnecessary upgrades." The manager's smile faltered, replaced by a scowl. "Well, maybe this isn't the right dealership for you then," he snapped. "We cater to serious buyers who understand the value of quality." With that, the customer turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent, everyone staring at the manager in disbelief. Even Martin stopped mopping, stunned by the sheer arrogance of the exchange. A few moments later, one of the junior salespeople approached the manager cautiously. "Sir, maybe we should follow up with him?" she suggested timidly. He seemed genuinely interested in the car. The manager scoffed, waving her off dismissively. "Don't waste your time. People like him never buy anything anyway. We don't need cheapskates ruining our numbers." Martin clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to step in. This wasn't just bad business. It was disrespectful. The manager had chased away a potential sale simply because the customer didn't bow to his demands. It was clear that his obsession with upselling was costing the dealership valuable opportunities. As the day wore on, Martin noticed cracks forming in the manager's authority. Employees whispered among themselves, sharing stories of similar encounters with dissatisfied customers. One mechanic mentioned how a client had stormed out after being told his repair request wasn't urgent enough. Another receptionist recounted how a family canceled their appointment after waiting hours for someone to assist them. Even the manager's closest allies, the ones who usually defended him, seemed to be losing faith. During a private moment, Martin overheard the finance manager venting to a colleague. "He's going to run this place into the ground," the man muttered. "No one wants to deal with his attitude anymore. If something doesn't change soon, we're done for." Martin nodded to himself, realizing that the staff knew exactly what was wrong. They just didn't have the power to fix it. That's where he came in. He wasn't just here to clean floors. He was here to give these people a voice, to create a workplace where they could thrive instead of survive. But before he could act, he needed proof. So that evening, after everyone had gone home, Martin stayed late to review security footage and financial reports. He accessed the dealership's system using credentials he'd been given as part of his undercover role. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Sales figures were plummeting. Month after month, fewer cars were being sold and profits were shrinking. Employee turnover was alarmingly high, More than half the staff had quit in the past year alone. Customer complaints were piling up, many citing poor service and aggressive sales tactics. The dealership's reputation was taking a hit online too, with negative reviews warning others to steer clear. Martin sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the extent of the damage. The manager's leadership style wasn't just ineffective, it was destructive. Without intervention, the dealership wouldn't last much longer. Still, there was hope. Despite everything, the employees cared about their work. They showed up every day hoping for a chance to succeed. Customers still visited, drawn by the promise of luxury vehicles. All they needed was someone to guide them, to rebuild trust, and foster a positive environment. As Martin locked up the dealership and headed home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would be another day of observation, and possibly confrontation. He knew the manager wouldn't change overnight, but Martin was determined to expose the truth. By the end of the week, everyone would know who he really was. And when that happened, the dealership would never be the same again. For now, though, Martin remained patient. He was still just the janitor, cleaning floors and staying invisible. But inside, he was already planning the changes that would transform this struggling business into something extraordinary. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere in the dealership was thick with tension. The manager's behavior had reached new heights, or rather, new lows. He strutted around like a king surveying his kingdom, but instead of inspiring loyalty, he left, a trail of resentment wherever he went. Employees avoided eye contact with him, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Customers lingered cautiously, sensing the hostility in the air. Martin, still undercover as the janitor, continued to observe everything quietly. He cleaned floors, wiped windows, and swept corners, all while keeping his ears open for conversations that revealed more about the inner workings of the dealership. What he saw and heard wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. The day started with another staff meeting. The manager called everyone into the break room, pacing back and forth like a drill sergeant. His voice boomed through the small space as he launched into yet another tirade about poor performance and missed targets. "We're losing customers left and right," he barked, glaring at the sales team. "And whose fault is that? Yours. You're supposed to be professionals, but you act like amateurs." No one dared to argue. Instead, they sat silently, their heads bowed, pretending to take notes or nod along. Martin watched from the corner, where he'd been asked to sit since he technically worked at the dealership too. He noticed how some employees clenched their fists under the table, while others stared blankly at the wall, shutting down emotionally. Then, predictably, the manager turned his attention to Martin. "And let's not forget our janitor here," he said loudly, pointing directly at him. "I know mopping floors isn't rocket science, but even you manage to mess it up sometimes. Maybe if you paid more attention, we wouldn't have to deal with complaints about dirty bathrooms." The room fell silent. Everyone shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh, cringe, or stay completely still. Martin didn't react. He simply nodded politely, pretending to accept the criticism without argument. Inside, though, he felt a flicker of anger, not for himself, but for the way the manager treated everyone else. These were hard-working people who deserved respect, not ridicule. After the meeting ended, Martin returned to his duties, determined to keep his focus. But as he cleaned near the sales desks, he overheard two employees whispering nervously about an upcoming inspection. Apparently, corporate headquarters was sending someone to evaluate the dealership's performance. No one knew exactly when the inspector would arrive, but rumors were spreading like wildfire. "They'll shut us down for sure if things don't improve," one of them muttered anxiously. "Sales are down, customers hate us, and morale is in the toilet. How can we possibly pass an inspection?" The other employee sighed heavily. "It's all because of him," she said, nodding toward the manager's office. "He doesn't care about anyone but himself. If corporate sees how bad things really are, we're finished." Martin listened intently, storing the information away. He realized this inspection could be the perfect opportunity to expose the truth, not just about the manager, but about the entire operation. He needed to gather more evidence to show beyond doubt that the dealership was on the verge of collapse. Later that afternoon, Martin decided to test the manager's competence himself. A wealthy investor walked into the showroom, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. He approached one of the junior salespeople, expressing interest in purchasing multiple cars for his company fleet. The manager immediately swooped in, eager to close the deal himself. "Good afternoon, sir," the manager said smoothly, extending his hand. "How may I assist you today?" The investor smiled politely. "I'm looking to buy several vehicles for my business. I need something reliable, affordable, and easy to maintain." The manager nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, we have exactly what you're looking for. Let me show you our top-of-the-line models." As the manager led the investor toward a display of luxury sedans, Martin watched closely. At first, the interaction seemed promising. The manager pointed out various features highlighting the car's advanced technology and sleek designs. But when the investor began asking detailed questions about financing options, the manager stumbled. "Well, the manager stammered, clearly unprepared. "Our financing packages vary depending on the model and your credit score. I'd recommend adding some upgrades, like extended warranties or custom interiors, to maximize value." The investor frowned, clearly unimpressed. "I appreciate the suggestions, but I'm more interested in straightforward terms. Could you explain the monthly payments and interest rates?" The manager hesitated, glancing around nervously. It was obvious he didn't know the answers. Sensing an opportunity, Martin stepped forward casually, pretending to clean nearby. "If I may," Martin interjected gently, catching both the manager and the investor off guard. "For a fleet purchase, we typically offer competitive rates, based on volume. Monthly payments start at X amount with flexible terms depending on your needs." The investor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That's helpful. Thank you." The manager, however, looked furious. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped at Martin, his face turning red. "This is none of your business." Martin shrugged innocently. "Just trying to help, sir. The customer asked a question and I happen to know the answer." The investor chuckled softly, clearly amused by the exchange. "Well, whoever you are, I appreciate the honesty. Let's move forward with those numbers." With that, the investor handed Martin his card and walked away, leaving the manager fuming. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded, stepping closer to Martin. "You're just a janitor. Stay in your lane." Martin didn't respond. He simply smiled faintly and went back to cleaning, knowing full well that he'd planted a seed of doubt in the manager's mind. For the rest of the day, the man watched him suspiciously, as if waiting for another misstep. That evening, after the dealership closed, Martin stayed behind to review more reports. He pored over financial data, customer feedback forms, and employee surveys. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The dealership was failing because of the manager's toxic leadership style. Sales were declining, turnover was skyrocketing, and customer satisfaction was at an all-time low. But amidst the chaos, there was hope. Employees cared deeply about their work. They just needed someone to believe in them. Customers wanted quality service. They just needed to feel valued. And Martin knew he could provide both. As he locked up and headed home, Martin allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow would be the final day of his undercover mission and the beginning of something extraordinary. He had gathered enough evidence to make his case, and he was ready to reveal his true identity. The manager wouldn't know what hit him. For now, though, Martin remained patient. He was still just the janitor, cleaning floors and staying invisible. But inside, he was already planning the changes that would transform this struggling business into something remarkable. Friday morning arrived and the air in the dealership felt electric. It was the final day of Martin's undercover mission, and he could sense that something big was about to happen. The manager seemed unusually tense, pacing the showroom floor, like a caged animal. Employees whispered nervously among themselves, glancing at the clock as if counting down the hours until the weekend. Martin started his day like any other, mopping floors, wiping down windows, and making sure everything looked spotless. But this time he carried himself with a quiet confidence. He knew the truth would come out soon, and he was ready for it. Around mid-morning, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A black luxury car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching softly against the gravel. Everyone stopped what they were doing to watch as two sharply dressed executives stepped out, followed by a man in a tailored suit. The man scanned the showroom with sharp, calculating eyes before turning to address the staff. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, but commanding. "I'm here to introduce myself. I'm the new owner of this dealership." The room fell silent. Employees exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. The manager froze where he stood, his face pale. For once, he didn't have anything to say. Martin stepped forward, his mop bucket forgotten beside him. He straightened up, standing tall as he removed his janitor's cap. "Thank you for coming," he said, addressing the group. Then turning to the manager, he added, "And thank you for giving me such a clear picture of how things work around here." The manager's jaw dropped. "Wait, what?" he stammered, staring at Martin in disbelief. You're the owner?" "That's right," Martin replied, his tone steady but firm. "I've spent this week observing every aspect of this business, from the way customers are treated to the way employees are managed. And let me tell you, it hasn't been pretty." The manager opened his mouth to protest, but Martin held up a hand, silencing him. "Let's start with your behavior," he continued. "You belittle your staff, pressure customers into unnecessary purchases, and create a toxic environment that drives people away. Do you know how many complaints we've received? How many employees have quit because they can't stand working under you?" The manager sputtered, trying to defend himself. But I didn't know who you were. If I'd known—" "That's exactly the problem," Martin interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Your treatment of others shouldn't depend on their title or appearance. Respect isn't conditional, it's earned when given freely. You failed miserably at both." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Employees watched wide-eyed as the man they'd mocked and ridiculed revealed his true identity. Some looked ashamed, while others seemed relieved. One young receptionist even covered her mouth to hide a smile, clearly thrilled to see justice served. Martin turned to the rest of the staff. "To everyone else, I want to apologize for what you've had to endure. No one deserves to be treated the way this manager has treated you. From now on, things will be different. We're going to build a workplace where respect, teamwork, and customer satisfaction come first." Applause broke out spontaneously, growing louder as more people joined in. The manager, meanwhile, slunk back toward his office, defeated. His reign of terror was officially over. Afterward, Martin gathered the team for an impromptu meeting. He introduced himself properly, explaining his background and vision for the dealership. "This place has potential," he said. "We have talented employees, beautiful cars, and loyal customers who deserve better. Together, we can turn this business around." He outlined several changes he planned to implement immediately. Raises for deserving employees, training programs to improve, skills and bonuses tied to customer satisfaction ratings. He also announced that the manager had been fired effective immediately, replacing him with someone who understood the importance of leadership through kindness and support. As the meeting wrapped up, Martin noticed a shift in the energy of the room. People smiled at each other, chatting excitedly about the future. Even those who had seemed burned out earlier in the week now looked hopeful. It was a reminder that change wasn't just possible, it was powerful. Later that afternoon, Martin took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. He walked through the showroom, admiring the shine of freshly cleaned floors and the sparkle of polished cars. Employees greeted him warmly, thanking him for stepping in and making a difference. Customers, too, noticed the change, commenting on how friendly and professional everyone seemed. One elderly woman approached Martin as he stood near the entrance. "Excuse me," she said, holding out her hand. "I just wanted to say thank you. My son bought a car here years ago, but we haven't been back since because of how poorly we were treated. Seeing this place today feels like a breath of fresh air." Martin shook her hand, touched by her words. "Thank you for sharing that," he replied sincerely. "It means a lot to hear feedback like yours. We're committed to making sure every customer leaves happy." As the day drew to a close, Martin locked up the dealership feeling proud of what he'd accomplished. In just 5 days, he had transformed a struggling business into a beacon of hope for employees, customers, and himself. He knew there was still work to be done, but he was confident they could achieve great things together. For now, though, Martin allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he could rest easy, knowing he had made a difference. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect reflection of the fresh start everyone at the dealership was experiencing. The parking lot buzzed with activity as employees arrived early to prepare for the day ahead. Gone was the tension that had once filled the air. Instead, there was an undeniable sense of excitement. People greeted each other warmly, sharing jokes and stories like they hadn't done in years. Martin stood near the entrance, watching it all unfold. He wasn't mopping floors or wearing a janitor's uniform anymore. He was dressed in a crisp suit, exuding confidence and authority. Employees approached him throughout the morning, thanking him for stepping in and making changes. Some even admitted they doubted him at first, but were now thrilled to see how things were turning around. One mechanic walked up, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. "I've worked here for 8 years, he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Never thought I'd see the day when someone actually cared about us, thank you." Martin smiled, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Thank you," he replied. "You're the backbone of this place. Without people like you, none of this would be possible." Inside the showroom, preparations were underway for a celebratory event. Martin had decided to host a grand reopening, not just to mark the dealership's new beginning, but also to show gratitude to the staff and customers who had stuck by them through tough times. Balloons decorated the space, banners hung from the ceiling, and refreshments were set up along one wall. It felt less like a car dealership and more like a community gathering. As noon approached, the crowd grew larger. Families browsed the cars, children ran around laughing, and employees chatted happily with visitors. Customers who had avoided the dealership for years returned, curious to see what had changed. Many expressed surprise at how welcoming and professional the staff now seemed. During a brief speech, Martin addressed the crowd. Standing on a small platform in the center of the showroom, he looked out at the sea of faces, employees, customers, and even a few local reporters who had come to cover the story. "This week has been eye-opening for me," he began, his voice steady and sincere. "I came here hoping to understand what made this business tick. What I found was a group of hardworking people who deserved better than the treatment they were receiving. So together we decided to make some changes." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Respect isn't something you earn based on titles. It's something you give freely. Every single person here matters, whether you're selling cars, fixing engines, or answering phones. That's the foundation we're building this dealership on moving forward." The room erupted into applause, with employees cheering loudly. One receptionist wiped away tears while another employee pumped his fist in the air. Even some customers clapped enthusiastically, clearly moved by Martin's message. After the speech, Martin spent time mingling with guests. He shook hands, posed for photos, and listened intently to feedback. A young couple told him they were finally ready to buy a car after hearing about the improvements. An older gentleman shared how much he appreciated the transparency of the financing process. Each interaction reinforced Martin's belief that businesses succeed not because of products or profits, but because of people. Later that afternoon, Martin pulled the team together for a private meeting. "This is just the beginning," he told them. "We've got a long road ahead, but I know we can do amazing things if we stick together. Remember, our goal isn't just to sell cars, it's to build relationships. Treat every customer like family and support each other like teammates." He announced further initiatives to boost morale and performance, flexible work hours for parents, monthly recognition awards for outstanding employees, and quarterly team-building events. He also encouraged open communication, promising to hold regular check-ins where anyone could voice concerns or ideas without fear of judgment. By evening, the celebration wound down, leaving behind a sense of accomplishment and hope. Employees lingered, reluctant to leave the positive energy behind. Some gathered in small groups reminiscing about the past week and speculating about the future. Others stayed late to help clean up, working together seamlessly like a well-oiled machine. As Martin locked up the dealership for the night, he took a moment to reflect. The journey hadn't been easy. He'd faced resistance, frustration, and moments of doubt, but it had been worth every challenge. This wasn't just a business turnaround, it was a human transformation. He had given people a chance to shine, and they had risen to the occasion. Driving home under a starry sky, Martin allowed himself a rare moment of pride. He thought about the mechanic who had thanked him, the receptionist who had smiled despite her stressful day, and the customers who had walked out happy. These weren't abstract successes. They were real lives touched by change. And somewhere far away, the former manager sat alone, nursing his bruised ego. Though humiliated, he couldn't deny the lesson he'd learned. Leadership isn't about power. It's about serving others. Whether he realized it or not, his downfall had sparked something extraordinary, a reminder that respect, kindness, and teamwork could transform even the most broken systems. For Martin, this was only the start. He knew challenges would arise and there would always be room for improvement. But as long as he kept people at the heart of everything he did, he believed anything was possible. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, he looked forward to the next chapter, not just for the dealership but for the community it served.